Right. Welcome to GGU Presents. This is Back to Basics, and I'm Marc Singer. I'm Dean of the School of Undergraduate Studies at Golden Gate University. And before I introduce our guest, I just want to say a couple of people have already sent us notes about how we've misspelled Baysics because it's Baysics, and a lot of them were alumni, and so this is good. We educated them well, but we misspelled it that way on purpose because, like, the Bay. Yeah, and if you have a better idea for how to spell things, please put it in the chat or in the Q&A, and we're happy to deal with that. I also want to recommend to you that if you have questions, you're all muted and there's no way around that. But if you do have questions or comments, there is a Q&A button at the bottom if you're on Zoom, as we are. And by all means, please post your questions there, and we will do our best to get to them, except if they're really weird, right? We're not going to do that. So
this might be the most fun, though.
Oh, that's, yeah. All right, you're right. Hit us. Yeah, let's see what you got. Anyway, so this is, and Joyce, who's our producer, I want to thank Joyce Martin for helping us, has just posted in the chat area to let everyone know she'll be moderating those questions. So that means that, she'll be able to funnel those to us as quickly as we need them to get to us. So all right, well, let's do this then, right? Let's see. All right, so I'd like to welcome, right, this is what I was leading up to, Sahaar Rezaie, who is the executive director of Genesys Works Bay Area. And Genesys Works Bay Area is part of a national college access and workforce development program that empowers high school seniors through classroom training and a year-long paid internship. And I could go on, but I'm gonna actually ask Sahaar to tell us a little bit about what she's doing. And so welcome, Sahaar. Thanks very much for being on our very first episode.
Thank you, Marc. And we're really excited to just be partnering with Golden Gate University. I know we'll talk a little bit more about that later. So just to give you start off with an overview of our mission and our program. So what we're really working to do is to address two critical challenges that we're facing in the US. You hear visionary leaders like Jeff Weiner, founder of LinkedIn, talk about this increasing skills gap. There are positions at times that go weeks, months at a time going unfilled. Simultaneously, we have youth across America that have the talent, the grit, the motivation, yet many lack access. The access to a professional network, the access to the right kind of training, and access to resources to just navigate the college application process. And so what we're really working to do is to help eliminate that gap. So as you mentioned, we are a college access and workforce development program. And in terms of how our program is broken down, so we start between the junior and senior year of high school. And for us, based on our theory of change, that's a really critical point to start our engagement. Because when you think about it, you're making these really tough decisions. Should I go to college? What college can I go to? How am I going to my education? And so that really is a point where we start working with individuals, and they spend the summer 2 months with us training. So we do professional skills training that really just focuses on soft skills development and some of those unwritten rules that you'll see when you're starting off working in a corporate environment. And we also spend time focusing on hard skills development as well, which is where Golden Gate University comes in. And for the students that are able to successfully complete that program, they then earn an internship with one of our partnering companies. So in terms of the companies that we work with here in the Bay Area, Salesforce, of course, has been a long time champion and partner of ours. Ebony Beckwith, who's the Chief Philanthropy Officer there, has done just a phenomenal job of creating an internship program for underserved youth at Salesforce. We also work with Okta, Box, Kaiser Permanente, so some really incredible, phenomenal companies that are here in the Bay Area. And so the students, they then do this year-long internship. So they're going to high school in the morning, and then they go to their internship in the afternoon. And during that year that they're with us, that development, the ongoing professional development continues to happen. So we're providing resources around financial literacy, really helping to navigate that college application process, applying for financial aid, things like that. In terms of the outcomes of our program, so 96% go on to college. 40% are pursuing degrees in STEM education, and they're graduating at a rate 3.5 times higher than what you would typically see for this demographic. And by this demographic, I mean the vast majority of our students are first generation college goers and are qualifying for free or reduced lunch in high school.
Wow, that's amazing. I do want to mention before we move on that you mentioned Ebony Beckwith at Salesforce, who was an alum of GGU, by the way.
Yes, I know that.
Yeah.
Yes. It sounds like we're both very fortunate to know her. She's
Yeah.
I mean, I first met Ebony back in 2009 when through an internship program, and just to see what she's done to develop that program at Salesforce and just the passion that she has, it's just, yeah, she's a great champion.
Oh, that's great. No, I'm really excited about the way you're talking about this overall approach, because you're right. It's not just hard skills, it's soft skills. It's
yeah.
And not only that, and this is something we've been thinking about at GGU recently as well. It's knowing how to navigate the systems, which is I guess that's more of a soft skill than anything else, but it's not something that's usually taught either in high school or in a university. And that's so essential, just making those connections, knowing how to understand the systems, you know, and how to move through them. Right?
Absolutely. I mean, I mentioned Jeff Weiner. There was an article that he put out not too long ago that that really it's soft skills development is really that's the main skills gap that we're facing in the U.S. And so I think it's at this point it's just as, if not more important than those hard skills. And both really, I mean, you really need both to be successful in these environments these days, because there's a lot of interaction that's happening internally and externally with your customers. So that's something that we really try to focus on. And just having been doing this work for 11 years now, I think what we hear from managers more than anything is, give me somebody who's hungry, who's motivated, and I can teach them all these other things. And so that really is something that we take into consideration. And so, and when we think about soft skills development, it's really also about, well, how do you problem solve and how do you utilize the resources that you have in front of you?
So it's really about mindset as much as training, really, that you're talking about. Right?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I think that's a big part of it. And just building that confidence, you know, I think that it's imposter syndrome is a real thing. And so, you know, I mean, I can't count how many times I've met a student at the beginning of our program, and you know, maybe they have trouble making eye contact and are just trying to feel out, well, what is this environment? And this is all so new. And as they progress through the program, you see they're standing taller, they're making eye contact, they're presenting in front of a large group of people. So I think that is actually one of the most important components of these kinds of programs, is just to help build that confidence so you feel like you really have a place at the table with these companies.
So does that, I feel like I'm launching right into like the heart of it before I even got to tell me about yourself, which I'll do in a moment. But you also mentioned this idea of the theory of change. And I'm thinking that probably has to be brought to bear on what you're describing, because you can't just put somebody in front of a classroom and say, do a presentation, right? So there's a theory of change, right? The thing that will help them get where they need to be from where they are, right? Is that something that's like articulated by Genesys Works, or is that something that you just know and you do it? You know, what do you think? I mean, can you talk about that?
Absolutely. I mean, our program starts off by really trying to build community. So it's first building that level of trust, the students being able to trust us, them trusting one another. And so I think that is a big part of when we look at our theory of change is really, when are we engaging with students? It's at this critical point in time. And then also all these things that they're learning, it's a part of this larger ecosystem, and is to help launch them years to come through college and also into their career.
Wow. Okay, great. All right. So now I should get to the first question that I was going to ask you, right? So, which I think is also really interesting, but it goes in a different direction. So you mentioned that you met Ebony in 2009, which means you've been doing this for some time. Can you talk about what brought you into the field that you're in right now? Like, what brought you to Genesys Works and this kind of work?
Sure. So what brought me to working with Opportunity Youth was, it actually happened during the last big economic downturn. So during the Great Recession, I was working for a technology company in Soma, and we were hit really hard with the recession. And overnight, 20% of our office was eliminated. And me being one of the newer team members, I was laid off. And I remember at the time being really scared. Living in San Francisco, unemployment insurance is not going to pay your rent here. So I just was kind of scrambling, thinking, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? What are my next steps? And so I immediately jumped into a job search to try to find something as quickly as possible. And during that time, I also had some free time now. And so I used to walk by this nonprofit organization on my way to work. And so I decided to walk in their door and try to volunteer for them. And that organization was a nonprofit called Year Up. And I started off as a guest lecturer, and it was just this immediate connection to the mission and to the work. As soon as I got in front of the students, just the eagerness that they brought to the table, the motivation, just the level of engagement, it was magnetic. And so I was really excited about volunteering for Year Up. And then I ended up getting this job offer for a similar type of work that I had been doing previously. And I mean, financially, it was more than I had ever made up to that point. And as I was looking at this offer, I just couldn't bring myself to accept it. And I even got frustrated with myself, like, what are you thinking? At that point in time, back in 2009, everybody knew someone who had been laid off here. I mean, most people did. And so I was really just kind of questioning myself. And then it really became clear that I wanted to be working with opportunity youth. And it felt like, I was being called towards that. And so I went and I approached the executive director there, a gentleman named Jay Banfield, who is now the chief officer of economic mobility for this fantastic organization called All Homes that's focused on homelessness. So I spoke with him and kind of hounded him a little bit, and that ended up turning into a position. And I was definitely also, at times a little bit hesitant. Oh my gosh, I'm making this big shift. What am I thinking at times? But 11 years later now, it was one of the best decisions that I've ever made in my life.
That's great. And I'm finding we also have worked with Year Up, and they do great work as well. And in fact, it's really become clear to me, it's fascinating. There's this network of community organizations that are really working not just in communities, but working to bridge this gap between our communities here in the Bay Area. And it's not just San Francisco, right? I know you do a lot of work in the Bay as well. Between those communities and all of the companies that have sprung up and become really big players in our economy in the last few years. So it's interesting to see that, first of all, there's clearly a need for the kind of work that you do, but it also seems, from what I've seen in your work in Europe and Mission Graduates and a few others, that you've been really successful at making those connections between folks.
Yeah, well, I think that's something that Genesys Works really believes in, and I felt the same way even during my time at Year Up, is that we really need to create this ecosystem. And one of the kind of a light bulb moment for me over the past 11 years was when we looked at our data and we looked at the graduates of our program, and we realized that individuals that had been involved in some sort of other similar type of program prior to them getting to our doorstep had a much higher probability of successfully completing our program. So I very much am a believer in forging partnerships with other community-based organizations. We all working towards a very common mission. Yeah. I would be delighted if some of our graduates went on to the Year Up program, and we work very closely with College Track and a lot of other different kinds of organizations that in one way or another, we are all connected. So I absolutely agree. And I think we've also been really fortunate. The Bay Area community, the corporate community has really welcomed us with open arms. And we've been able, I think a lot of this philosophy, it comes from the top down. And so people like Mark Benioff, the 1-1-1 model, you're seeing that replicate more often at other companies. And I think that it's just something that we're seeing happening more often here in the Bay Area. And I know we still got a long way to go, but it's really great to see the progress that we've made.
That's great. And when we talk about having a long way to go, I want to get into that in a moment because things have changed recently. If some of you aren't aware, there's some differences in the last couple of months. And before I do that, could you, for folks who may not know, talk about what the 1-1-1 program or a model is?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So the 1-1-1 model is as a corporation, as a company, you are donating 1% of your time, 1% of your product, and 1% of your revenue.
Oh, it's pretty modest, but that makes a big difference for an organization like Salesforce, doesn't it?
Yeah, when you're talking about $1 billion corporation, that does, that's not a drop in the bucket necessarily. That makes a difference.
No, that'd be great. All right, cool. So you mentioned a moment ago that you got into this work because of the Great Recession, and I've been reading probably a bit too obsessively about the parallels and also the differences between the recession that happened in 2008, 2009, and the recession that's happening now because of the pandemic. So now we're just a few months ago, you know, there was really low unemployment, and then there seemed to be jobs for a lot of folks. Suddenly things are different. So, but I'm also imagining that the community that you serve are being affected, if not as much more so than some of the corporations around Golden Gate, you know, in Soma, in the East Coast.
Yeah.
Can you talk about that? Like, how is this affecting the folks you work with, and how is it affecting your work as well?
Yeah, so I mean, we're hearing reports across the country that underserved communities are being hit hardest by this pandemic, both from a health and safety standpoint, both from an economic standpoint. And that very much aligns with what we're seeing here in the Bay Area. So we conducted a survey to just really try to better understand how the students that we serve are being impacted by COVID-19. And we found that over 50% of the individuals that responded to our survey had said that at least one adult in their household had been laid off due to COVID-19. And over 40% are now the only individual in their household that is earning a consistent paycheck. We're talking about 17 and 18-year-olds here. So I think it has absolutely impacted our community. Another statistic is that, another kind of point of what we were researching, they also indicated that it was, so 29% indicated that they were in fear of losing their housing. So, so yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it's really real and it's really relevant. And it really emphasizes how important these types of programs are. I mean, we have to survive this. We have to get through this pandemic because we're going to be needed more now and at the other side of this crisis than we ever have before, especially for these communities that we're serving.
Yeah, so then, but if you're talking about teaching people soft skills and hard skills, you know, you gave the example before of having somebody do a presentation in front of the classroom, you know, making eye contact, whatever it is. How do you do that now? I mean, when everyone's sheltering in place? And it must really pose some challenges, right?
It's a great question. So, you know, I think that you're seeing this with a lot of businesses that you're having to now plan and redo, you know, projects, initiatives, training 2-3 times, and so we are really working to adapt to what's happening right now in the market. So we've already transitioned. So our summer training typically happens in person, and for the first time ever, we are now going to be facilitating that virtually. And so, so that's a shift in itself. So we're training our own staff on, well, what does it mean to, how does that feel? What does it mean? What does it look like to facilitate virtually? We're tapping volunteers in a different way than we ever have before as well, to ensure that our students continue to have those interactions with external stakeholders and champions. We are changing the content of our curriculum to cater to potentially virtual internships. At this point, we're thinking at least to start, potentially longer. Our next group of students are starting their internships in September, and we're already hearing reports that, hey, look, this will most likely be a virtual internship for the future. So yeah, we've definitely had to shift, and I think we're fortunate that we are an organization that has been able to be nimble and agile. So I was just on a call earlier this week where we did a rollout of our updated curriculum, and so we have team members from across the country that are really working together on this. And I think it's interesting, but it really has even created even more of a feeling for us like we are all a part of the same community, regardless of what city we're in, especially because, I mean, this is something that's impacted communities across the US. Whereas historically, our Houston office, you know, they've been hit by a hurricane and it was very specific to that market. But now we are all facing these challenges. And so it really has created an opportunity for us all to work together to resolve them.
Wow. So I just want to ask you a question about an internship. Can you do an internship virtually? I mean, and what would that look like? Would you feel, well, how would you design that? How would that work?
Mm-hmm. So the answer to that is absolutely. We're seeing it happen. You know, when the shelter in place first started, we had interns that were overnight. Some of them had to shift from being in person to virtual. Some were able to do that a lot more quickly than others. And so we are definitely seeing that there are opportunities to continue that learning virtually. So if you're doing technical support, for example, you're working in a ticketing system. Someone gets locked out of their account and needs to reset their password. That can all be done virtually. A manager reached out to us just this week and shared this incredible dashboard that one of our interns had created that their customers were using as kind of like this community dashboard around COVID-19. So we definitely are seeing that there are opportunities to convert these internships to virtual. Of course, it's not ideal. We would like to have in-person engagement, but I think similar to a lot of other positions where before this happened, we thought, that'd be a tough position to do virtually. We're making it work. And I think that we were headed in this direction anyway, but it's just happening a lot faster, I think, than we had anticipated.
You mean you were moving in this direction because a lot of the nature of work has become online?
Yeah, I mean, just similar to trying to adapt to the marketplace. I mean, a lot of work is being shifted to virtual, and that has been the case for years now. And so I think we knew at some point, whether it was our training or actually our internships, that there would be some components that would shift to virtual. So this is really, I think this was kind of inevitably going to happen anyway. And so we're just having to act a lot more quickly to ensure that quality isn't sacrificed while we're trying to make these transitions. And I mean, I think also just thinking about the skill sets that we're training for, how we're partnering with Golden Gate University and focusing on data analytics, those are things that can, in a lot of ways, be done remotely and virtually.
Mm-hmm. That's great. We just actually got a question in the chat, and I would ask folks if you like, put questions in the Q&A if you can see that on your screen. But we've already gotten a couple of really good questions, so I'm just one of them builds on this right away. So one thing that I know is a challenge for us at Golden Gate, we do a fair amount of online learning. We have courses that are online and mixed mode, and we have in-person courses when we did have in-person courses. But one of the questions we always wrestle with is the one about building community. How it's a real challenge to build community online. It can be done, but it's a challenge. How much thought are you giving to that, or how would you say you've been successful in that?
Yeah, so what we're trying to do is create opportunities to have smaller group sessions. So and not necessarily we're decreasing the amount of time that we're facilitating, just like a lecture, for example. So I think that's one of the opportunities by creating in Zoom now. There are all these new features. I think every day there's a new Zoom feature that I think we're all trying to figure out and use. So we're really trying to take advantage of that. And so I think that the opportunity to really break off and have some smaller group interactions is something that we've already implemented into our updated curriculum. We're also looking at, could there be an opportunity to, at some point down the line, meet in smaller groups, practice social distancing. You're seeing a lot of companies, I mean, we were just discussing this during our quarterly board meeting this week, that a lot of companies are shifting. So you can, a couple days a week you're in the office, and then the rest of the time you might be at home. So we're looking at some other types of opportunities where they can at least have some in-person interaction and engagement. But I think it's not going to be easy. We're going to have to work at it, and we're going to have to be consistent with it. So I think we're also going to have a lot of learning lessons, continuing to have these learning lessons that will help inform how we build community in the future. So I not to minimize it, I think this is definitely a new challenge that none of us have faced before. But we still need to make sure we're capitalizing on those opportunities that we still have in front of us.
Yeah, and I guess, right, you also want to think about peer-to-peer interactions, right? How they get to connect with each other and share their experiences, and not just work directly with us or with you, in this case.
Yeah, and we've had several of our partners reach out and say, hey, we realize that volunteering may be a lot more challenging during this time, but we want you to know that we're still here. We're still ready. We want to engage. And so we're now also they're also a part of our larger community. And similar to, I'm sure, what you experienced at Golden Gate University. And so we are making sure that we're continuing to provide those opportunities for champions to come in and really work with our students during summer training and beyond. So we're still going to do things like mock interviewing and networking sessions. It may feel a little bit different, but there's still, we believe that there'll still be some really great benefits by facilitating these kinds of things online.
Mm-hmm. And do students, all right, I'm shifting gears because I'm also looking at questions as people are,
sure.
as we're talking, but do students who complete the program get some kind of certification or a badge or something like that?
Yes, well, great point. So thanks to our this new partnership that we've formed with Golden Gate University. So our students that complete summer training, and this is a first time we've been able to offer this with Genesys Works, so something that we're really excited about. And I think it's also with workforce development programs, we realize that there are multiple pathways to success. Of course, there's not just one option or one pathway. Genesys Works still, when it comes to economic mobility, we still very much are advocates for college matriculation. So I think this really emphasizes the importance of this partnership to us. So students during that summer training, they'll walk away with 3 college credits and also micro-certification from Golden Gate University in data analytics. So that's something that I think in terms of their college applications that they can now put on. I was connecting with Oakland Unified School District earlier this week, and they're going to be able to enable us to work within their system so it automatically can get added to their transcripts and profiles. So this is just a really interesting and great opportunity, and we're already hearing a lot of buzz from our other cities wanting to do something similar. We are even discussing, could Golden Gate potentially train some of our students in other markets as well, now that we're virtual. So I think this is something that it's not short term. I mean, though we're dealing with COVID-19, but even that virtual learning is something that I think can benefit us as we're really even looking at serving students potentially in more rural communities. So for multiple reasons, this is a partnership that we feel like will enhance our program and really benefit our students.
Oh, that's great. I totally did not mean that to be a segue into trumpeting like all the great stuff we're doing. I was thinking of something else, but
right. No.
Thanks for working that in. That was really helpful. Yeah. So the original plan was your students would be in a couple of different cohorts. One group would meet at the Salesforce Tower, which is just across the street from us, in the morning. And then come to us in the afternoon for this data analytics course. And then the other cohort would swap, right? They'd be with us in the morning and then go to Salesforce in the afternoon for the other training that they're involved with in the summer, right? Now, of course, we're moving all of that online for the foreseeable future. But I guess if any course had to be adapted that way, it's probably a data analytics course, because so much of it is working at a terminal, and there's certainly the interaction with the instructors and all that, but it's a course that really is about the sort of permeability of the boundary between the in-person and online. So and I should mention Marc Singer is the person who really made that happen, and since we're talking about it, and he might even be listening, so
yeah. So Marc has just been fantastic to work with. I think what's great is that what we're seeing with Sia and you is just this really passion about working with students from underserved communities. And so I think it really makes this partnership work, that we both really see the benefit to the students. And so we're June 15th, we're starting it off, we're kicking off our coursework.
Oh man, that's really soon. That's like a month from. We should really get our act together, shouldn't we? So I have a couple other questions, and I see 1 or 2 other questions have come in that I want to get to. So you touched on this a little bit already, but this is a question again that we're wrestling with. So I don't have an answer. So please, if you have one, tell me. I'll know. Are you seeing anything that you mentioned that you're already thinking about moving to a more virtual environment for some of these programs, because that's the world of work that these students will be encountering after these programs. Are there other aspects of what you're having to do right now while we're sheltering in place that that you see Genesys Works Bay Area keeping afterward? Like, in other words, what are you learning about your approach or the students' needs that you think you would be able to keep going forward, that maybe this was a valuable opportunity to learn something like that?
Yeah, well, I think our goal is really to eliminate barriers so that our students are able to engage in programs like ours. And something that we noticed is, so the first component of our program that we had to shift to virtual was our interviews for new students, for potential new students. And when you look at the rate going from an application to an actual interview between inviting somebody and someone who might withdraw. It's typically around 40 to 50%. And what we saw, the outcomes after COVID-19 and transitioning these interviews to virtual, it was actually closer to 70%. And so I think that for us was a really aha moment that, hey, it might be challenging at times to, whether it's getting funding to just, or to be able to take public transportation, to come to our physical location, or sometimes it can be challenging just to get a ride. So I think that's something that was in some capacity that we may want to continue to just ensure that we're enabling more students to just be able to even have an opportunity to interview with our program. So I think that's something that was that was a shift that we didn't know which way it would go. We thought, are we gonna have not as many, or are we gonna have more? And it was definitively more. So that's I think we may continue to replicate in some way. Also, I touched upon this in terms of geography. We've historically had to really try to stay close to the BART lines so that students were able to get to their internships. And this is something that is not just here in the Bay Area, it's across the country. The transportation is just a challenge, especially when you think about gentrification and a lot of families that are in more rural communities. So I think that there's also an opportunity there to try to serve potentially, whether it's working with a company that we maybe typically wouldn't have been able to, or working with students that typically maybe didn't have access to our program because of the physical location. I think those are things that programs like ours really will want to look at and adapt to be able to serve more students. So those are two really immediate things that come to mind. I think something else to mention is that we are also taking a stronger stance on what are the skills that are being taught specifically at the internships. To ensure that these are skills for the future. And I think that there's a difference between somebody, let's say, for example, doing technical support, doing inventory and figuring out how many laptops and asset management, things like that, versus being able to work through their online system and being able to do ticketing. So I think it really has pushed us to make sure that these internships are really teaching our students skills that they can apply to positions regardless of where they're located. So, maybe if you're going to college here locally, you can take a position supporting end users in Nebraska, for example, wherever the case, wherever it may be. So I think that also is something that we're looking at and has actually caused some change that I think we can continue through on the other side of this pandemic.
Ah, no, that's great. So two questions came in. You sort of touched on both of them, so I think we should probably mention them. But one is, I think you already mentioned this when you mentioned like being able to work in Nebraska, for instance, while being in the Bay Area. The question is, how does virtual delivery enhance or expand access for you? Like, does this give Genesys Works an opportunity to think beyond like BART access, for instance?
Yeah, I think it's both. In some ways it can be limiting, in other ways it enhances. In terms of being able to support students in communities that we maybe typically wouldn't have access to, I think that's obviously an enhancement. However, this shelter in place has also been really challenging on certain individuals. So for example, if you don't have consistent access to Wi-Fi, that can be really hard to do online learning and have a virtual internship, for example. Or if you're in a home where you have 7-8 people living with you, it can be really hard to find a quiet place to be able to just be on your laptop. So I think that we also really need to be aware of the negative impact and make sure that we're not going too far to one side so that those individuals are then left out. So that's absolutely something. As we're even looking at our next cohort of students, we're sending out a tech survey to make sure that all of our students are really able to get this, to be able to have access. And so, and for the individuals that don't have that access, we're going to be providing resources for them.
Okay, you read my mind. All right, that was my question. And can you also do an assessment of soft skills coming in, or is that just a baseline that you assume about students? I can imagine that being more challenging, but we have a question about soft skills and how you integrate that, which we talked about a little bit earlier.
Yeah, so well, we do. I think during the interview process, there's some assessment, there's some soft skills assessment that happens just based on the questions that we're asking and things like body language. However, we also really want to be aware that soft skills is something that you can absolutely improve over time. And so just because someone might be struggling with eye contact and communication during our interview doesn't necessarily mean that individual can't be productive and can't be an excellent intern to one of our partnering companies. And so, so I think that we do have some flexibility on the front end. But then during the program, we focus on just a different area depending on what week they're in the program. So whether it's presentation skills, whether it's building your network. So we've launched a partnership with LinkedIn where we're actually utilizing their curriculum to help our students create online profiles, even get to their internship. So that way, when they get to their internship, it's a lot easier for them to connect with other team members and as they're doing things like informational interviews. So, so that learning is definitely ongoing, and a core part of our curriculum is that soft skills development. Because as I mentioned before, it's something that's been identified as our partners as one of the main areas for them to be successful in these kinds of environments.
Yeah, no, likewise for us as well. And with us, it's our students are a bit farther down the line, than the people you're working with. But we're also thinking about leadership and an understanding of diversity. Basically, emotional intelligence is really key.
Yeah, and self-awareness. Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely, that's great. So I don't want to finish without talking about the internships themselves, right? You mentioned that there were a number of organizations you work with, who provide internships to your students. But I'm sure there are others who don't know about this yet. Maybe that's why they're here today. So can you talk about that a little bit? How would one go about
Sure.
that?
Yes, and that's a process that we work collaboratively with our partners. So if someone is feeling like, hey, I've never hosted an intern or we don't have an internship program, we can help you build one. We've been doing it for a long time. So we have job descriptions. We do manager orientation, manager onboarding to really understand, well, how do you best support an intern? How do you make sure that this is a successful experience for all parties? We then have we have program coordinators that continue working with that manager throughout the internship phase of the program and working with the students throughout that time as well. So really if someone is interested in learning about, well, what would it look like? We are absolutely, we can have that conversation. We can really guide as much as someone would like, or if they already have a program, we very much can plug into their company's internship program as well. We work alongside a lot of university programs, for example. Even though we start at the high school level, we do still provide additional internship opportunities for our graduates as they're matriculating through college. So yes, I think it's really having a conversation, and you can find out information through our website, which is genesysworks.org, and that's Genesys, GENESYS works.org. And it's 2 clicks of a mouse, and you can set up some time for us to talk a little bit more about what your needs are and what an internship program at your company or on your team would look like.
Good, and I put that website address at the top of the chat. It's the very first thing in the chat if folks are interested in, or if they've already forgotten the spelling, because that was something we were talking about just before we got on, right? Like who knew, right, that search engines were going to be so fickle, right? It's SYS. Right?
Yes, thank you.
No, that's really good. So we did get another question. I think we talked about pieces of it. It probably relates to the soft skills conversation. But it's a question about teamwork. So it's not only in the, in your regular program, but now that everyone's virtual, how can you foster or teach teamwork?
Yeah, I mean, I think just having worked with, at this point, countless cohorts, I think it's really important to develop that trust and camaraderie and community at the front end. So That's why we, at the beginning of our program, even before they get to our doorstep, we're really trying to provide opportunities for individuals to get to know one another. Because you really, once you get to that point of where individuals are feeling like this is a sense of family, I think that's when you really are able to build teams that are very productive and just work together well. So I think that the first part of building a team, even before you might break individuals up into teams, is just building that sense of community with that entire cohort of individuals, with the staff members. So I think that's something that we put a tremendous amount of focus on at the front end of our program. And then also just giving individuals guidance and opportunities to work together on projects. So our goal will be to have breakout sessions, as I had mentioned, so that individuals can have opportunities to work on different teams. And then also, you know, I think that it's also about building a community across all of our alumni as well. And we talk about teams, yes, that'll be important as they're going on to their internships. But really, I think the way that I look at our alumni is they're a part of this greater team, you know, of thousands of individuals. And so really to help build that sense of community amongst themselves. And that's something that we're trying to focus more and more on. Is it's not necessarily about having I mean, yes, part of it is having a great relationship with our staff, but it's really about developing those relationships with one another. So, so I think that's something that we do really try to focus on quite a bit. And it's something that we'll continue to do.
That's great. And you can see from the kinds of questions you're getting that this is the part of it that people are wrestling with and are really interested in, right? Because there are boot camps and things like that. People can teach skills, but it's this soft skills, this teamwork, this sort of less easily defined aspect of it that I think is so compelling.
Yeah, and I think also it's also about enabling individuals to be open and honest with one another, and to be able to provide feedback. Yeah, I mean, I think that's a big part of it. And I just was recently watching the documentary, was it The Last Dance about Michael Jordan. And during one of the moments, they talk about how they were there's this moment where they're at the beginning of the series, and there's this conflict that arises. And in the locker room, they had this opportunity where they really confronted one another, and it got emotional, but it allowed them to move past that moment. And so I think that also is something that just from what I've seen when we've been able to facilitate a lot of feedback moments and discussions, it seems like that also is really a great way of developing a team, and enabling students to look at one another as helping one another, as opposed to creating this really competitive environment. I think it's okay to have competition, but as long as it's healthy. So that's something that also I think has been really important when we try to build community, is giving students the opportunity to give one another feedback in a way that feels productive and caring. And that really, again, it goes back to building that trust. And so I think that has really helped us in the past build, I think, successful teams and communities.
Oh, that's amazing. This is really fascinating. I didn't know most of this, which is part of the reason for the talk show, so that I can learn stuff, and I hope others find it interesting too. You know, one other question I do have for you, and I think we're about out of time, so we talked about how organizations can find you, you know, and can participate in this internship program. How do you find the students? Are they referred, or do they apply, or what if somebody were interested in this?
Yeah, so we have formal partnerships with schools across Oakland and San Francisco Unified. So that's mainly where we are engaging with students. So we're actually in the process right now of formalizing a partnership with all of Oakland Unified School District, and so we have a MOU with San Francisco Unified School District. So we actually go in and present at high schools and talk to them about the program, and they have an opportunity to engage with us on our website. However, if you directing people to our website, they're actually, you can submit a form if you want to learn more about our program. So I strongly recommend individuals to do that. Also, I'm on LinkedIn, so I'm very searchable. So I'm happy to engage with anyone that might be interested in learning more about our program. So I would say either our website or really reaching out to me directly also.
Great. And they can see your name right there. So right in the corner of your screen, right? The Sahaar Rezaie. So Sahaar, I don't think I think we're good. So I want to thank you very much for talking to us. So again, I know a couple of people joined in late. I'm seeing the number of participants going up and down. This will be posted on the GGU website under GGU Presents, I should say, and eventually to YouTube once we, we're not techies. We got to figure that out. But it's going to happen really soon. But I really want to thank you, Sahaar. Sahaar is the executive director of Genesys Works Bay Area, and God, you're probably busier now than you were before, right? I mean, it sounds like there's a lot to do.
Yeah, I would say so. It's been interesting. I think I was talking to somebody saying, I think some people are less busy and others are more. I think we're definitely in the more category, which I mean, I think of that as a blessing. So we're not complaining.
That's great. And somebody just thanked you in the Q&A for your.
Thank you as well.
I'm going to read it, for your philosophy and your delivery, I think is what he's saying. All right. So anyway, this was our first episode, and Sahaar, thanks so much for being our guinea pig. But I hope nobody, I don't think, was too embarrassed by any of this. I think it's great. So thanks, and I'm looking forward to working with you this summer on our project, right?
Yes, we are as well.
So that's great. Wait, we have some outro music, so you can't leave yet. We have to hear the outro,
great.
and then that's how we know it's over. Yeah, that's right. All right.